Support for the BTPM NPR What's Next podcast comes from Health Foundation for Western and Central New York, partnering with the community to pursue racial and socioeconomic health equity. Learn more at hfwcny.org.
From Buffalo Toronto Public Media, this is What's Next, an hour dedicated to amplifying the voices of marginalized and underrepresented communities across Western New York and Southern Ontario.
We cannot erase, we cannot reform, we cannot make things better if we're uncomfortable having tough conversations,
Absolutely.
if we're uncomfortable talking about race.
What's Next carries forward our mission to engage in meaningful conversations about race, equity, and the shared concerns that deeply affect Buffalo's East Side and beyond.
Don't stop. Make those families part of your life. Their lives are part of yours. Don't stop.
Together, we dive into the real issues, striving for understanding, connection, and change.
In the suburban area, everywhere, we must work and teach our children.
Welcome to What's Next on Buffalo Toronto Public Media NPR. My name is Jay Moran.
And my name is Ijaz Jasil.
Glad to have you along with us, Ijaz, today as we talk about Queen City Forward. With us, two members of the Department of Transportation, their Public Information Officer for Region 5, Ryan Whalen, and also Taje Jenkins-Jones, Special Assistant Outreach Coordinator for Region 5. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to have you here.
If everybody's tuning in and wondering what Queen City Forward is, we're going to get to that question. But just a reminder, this is in essence the next evolution of the Kensington Expressway project that, of course, has drawn so much news in recent years. The original concept of putting a tunnel in through the east side for the Kensington has, I guess, been put on hold, not necessarily abandoned, and we'll get into why that is. But Queen City Forward, why is it? What is Queen City Forward?
Yeah, well, obviously this project has a lot of history. This conversation hasn't just been going on for years. It's been going on for decades within certain groups in the community. And we had a project. We talked about the tunnel over a portion of the Kensington Expressway. The project was getting underway. It was held up in court. And after an initial court decision was made, the state and the commissioner, came to the conclusion that not only were we dealing with the legal portion of that, but that it was clear that there wasn't the broad community consensus that we felt we needed in order to take a project of this magnitude and get it done for the city and get over all of those hurdles. And so we decided to basically go back to the drawing board and say, we are not going to go in with the predetermined tunnel project. As you said, doesn't mean it's gone, but it's not going to be our starting point here. We're going to go back to the community and work from the outside in and say, how do you deal with the Kensington Expressway? What are your concerns? What do you like about it now? How do you travel on it? And what do you want to see for the future of it? And then there's obviously many other steps to that process, but we thought that this would be a good way to start going out to the communities across Western New York, but especially in the city of Buffalo first, and saying, what do you want and how do you interact with us?
Okay, and I understand that there are already new listening sessions underway, new opportunities for community engagement. Mm-hmm. But there were some from that first 33 project. I understand this is, as you just explained, something completely new now. But what have you been able to take away from those early instances of feedback and listening sessions that maybe you can apply moving forward to Queen City Forward?
So in the very early stages, before we knew what direction we go with our new feedback approach, we look through comments, we've looked through like information, data from the old project. And I think for us, the biggest thing we realized is that there was not one consensus as to how to move forward with things. And that people felt like they needed to express more to us, right? And I don't want to put that more into a box and say it was this one specific thing. But I think that everyone we talk to, you get a different story, a different conversation. And I think with these listening sessions that we've had, we've broadened that even more, right? We heard people talk about now, well, what does construction look like, right? Mm-hmm. Will I lose any property? Will you have to take any property? Will you have to, what effects would that have on homeowners insurance? What effects will that have on, the noise outside? Will my kids be able to still play in front of the house? So there's these other, I don't even want to say more important, but these other priority conversations that we needed to have. And so I think going back and starting with these listening sessions, it was important to have some sort of raw data to move forward with. Yeah. To decide what the community approach needed to look like. And with these initial conversations, we're getting those specifics. We're getting qualitative and quantitative data that is useful, right? And it's because we're challenging folks to talk about it in a different way than they may have already discussed, right? So we know what people may want to see. We know the nostalgic conversations, but what are those real hardline conversations that folks, specifically to the folks that live along that footprint, along that project area specifically, that would have to endure it more than any person that commutes, any person that travels through the neighborhood. And so we wanted to craft a process that could both be slow and thorough. So right now we've done as many listening sessions and we've jumped around different neighborhoods and we've tried to make sure that we're encompassing, really, it's really pretty ambitious because it was a pretty robust footprint that we're trying to encompass, but we're also being intentional about making them accessible to people who may be on foot that live within the neighborhoods, which is what brings us to the last two that we did between Canisius and East High School. We've jumped from one side of the 33 to the other side, all with the mindset of making it accessible to people that live in the area.
Intentional is a good word. I hesitate to use slow because people don't want to hear slow, especially in a project that we've been working on for so long. Intentional and necessary, would be the words I would use, because there's a process that we have to do, and it requires getting your ducks in a row. And the environmental impact statement process through the federal government is a big, thorough, really, specific process that you have to follow. And so when people say, well, why didn't you just go and do the environmental impact statement? Well, we have to figure out these alternatives. There's a lot of things that we're getting in order just to be able to do that, because once you file that notice of intent, the NOI, for an environmental impact statement, you're on a 2-year clock. And for some projects, 2 years, you might be able to get it done a little earlier. We fully expect that we'll need to use the entire 2 years once we start doing that. So we need to make sure that we have everything prepared. And we're doing that, parallel to what you're seeing public forward. But at the same time, while we have this time where we're doing all of that behind the scenes work, we have this opportunity to go out and speak to people too. So I think we're really making the best use of the time that we need and have.
You mentioned this to us before we went on the air, so anybody worth expanding upon right now is, while I think the majority of the conversation, I referenced it in my open, that we've been talking about the tunnel project, which, and you even mentioned that could be a lot more than that, but we're not just talking about that section of the Kensington that has been really the focal point of the conversation, right? The part that, I guess, went from like Ferry Street up about a mile stretch or whatever the case may be with the projected tunnel. This could be encompassing a much larger portion of Route 33 in essence. Right?
That's right. We have not established any project limits. So I've seen people talk about project limits on social media. That's not us. There right now there aren't project limits, so we don't know. What we have said as a state is that our focus is on this being a Kensington Expressway Route 33 project. But as we know, that's a pretty long stretch. So we don't know if we're talking about from the airport to downtown. We don't know if we're talking about from Humboldt Parkway to downtown, and that's intentional so that people can come in and talk about how they're dealing with it and what they'd like to see, rather than us telling them what the project limits or parameters are right now, because it is so early still. So why put those limits on yourself at this point?
Right. So to marry how expansive this project is going to be with the DOT's need for community feedback, the DOT has emphasized hearing from suburban commuters as well as city residents, as this is going to affect many folks, including those who live outside the city. But is there going to be some weight placed on, not saying anyone's feedback matters more than the next person, but looking at the folks who live along the areas where the pollution, the construction, the noise, all those things are going to happen? What kind of considerations are there going to be in terms of hearing from commuters and from people who actually live in the impacted areas?
So I'd say right now, for one, I don't want to speak out of turn and say that we have any sort of like formula at the moment. Those are considerations that we always have to take in because, for one, it obviously, right? It's just something, feedback that we need to take in. But I think that to Ryan's point about intentionality, where they're located is specific to how it's affecting the area. We did have a session in Cheektowaga. We did have a session in Amherst. Interestingly enough, the same conversation about filling it in came up in those areas. Sure. So it's not, I don't think it's specific to one portion of the city.
Right.
But us coming back into the city now, being intentional, we've now, next session is a collaboration with Buffalo Public Schools. That was a very intentional relationship that was being created because one, who has more access to every pocket of the city than Buffalo Public Schools, number one. And it allowed us to go into a trusted space with trusted partners and present these sessions in a way where people understand that what's important is that we get the collective feedback of the region. I think every session is open to anyone who's interested and is a stakeholder of any sort within the process. But we're intentionally putting them in areas where we know that the people that are most affected can access them more easily. So if that makes sense, not to say that we're waiting where the sessions are located per se heavier, but we are being intentional about where we're putting them because one, it's about encompassing, again, a very large portion of highway that stretches throughout more than just one part of the east side. Mm-hmm. So it's that piece, I think, is at the table. But as of right now, there's no specific weighting process that we have. Like if a comment comes in and someone zip code is closer to here, we're not putting it in one box and then putting these in another box, which is why it's so important when people come to the listening sessions to really be imaginative about what this can look like. Think about what the practical usage of this space is like. And then, if you feel like these sessions aren't close enough to your house, say that. Like those comments are just as valid because as we move forward with process, we are going to review all of the comments and decide what the best mode of transportation forward is. No pun intended.
I think
nice. I got a feeling you've used that before.
That's a good one.
Weight is another one of those buzzwords that gets me a little worried because the thought is obviously the people that live along Humboldt Parkway, along the Kensington Expressway are a wildly important voice in this conversation. Look, the health impacts, the environmental impacts are not lost on us. They're a very important part of this process. But when we talk about weight, I hear vote. And I hear people, I don't want people to participate in this process thinking that they need to go out and stuff the ballot box for the project that they want. Mm-hmm. Because this is a process. This is one part of it. And then we're going out and getting all this information through this multi-year, sort of study environmental impact process. So we're looking at the traffic analysis for basically the entire transit system around the city of Buffalo. And that all goes into it. And this process is meant to winnow down to alternatives and to show people our work and why one thing can work and what doesn't. So I always want to address this topic with caution because I don't want it to sound like I'm telling anybody how they need to interact with these listening sessions or what they can say. But I also don't want them to feel like they need to go out and vote for their project because we're looking at all of these alternatives. And I think when you think I need to go out and put one specific thing down so that everybody knows that this is what we're telling DOT, that limits what you're doing as far as engaging with the process. So I tell people they can be as specific or as broad as they want to be. You can talk about, one on-ramp that you're having issues with, or that this pedestrian bridge you don't feel is safe or something like that. Or you can talk about, broadly what you want it to be. But I had a conversation with, one of the people that we've been dealing with throughout this project. And she said, Lanessa Owen Chaplin from the NYSDOT, and she said when they go out and canvass, they tell people, forget tunnel, forget fill in, forget all of those preconceived what the project is. Close your eyes. This is an open-ended process. This is your chance to have an imagination and really say whatever you want about this. When you think of a Kensington Expressway project in 5 years, in 10 years, what do you see when you close your eyes? What do you hear out there when you close your eyes? And then you start thinking specifically to how this affects me and how this affects my community. And I think that gives us an opportunity to really draw some meaningful feedback without those preconceived biases of what the project can and can't be.
In that vein, I kind of wanted to ask a follow-up. Does it kind of make it a little more difficult for you then to tell folks, this is kind of open-ended, it's not supposed to be this one thing, when in the beginning, I think even from folks like Governor Hochul, this was almost billed as a restorative justice type of project, looking at the folks in the Humboldt Parkway area, how a highway was put through their neighborhood. And, this is kind of a way to restore their neighborhood and their community, restore Olmsted's vision. Not to say that you're moving away from those things, but this is such an expansive project. How do those ideas kind of complicate maybe trying to communicate to folks exactly what this is going to be?
Yeah, and I'd want to defer to Taje, who actually grew up in that community as well. But it's still a focus. It's still important. It's not lost on us. Obviously, administrations change and focuses change. And like we said, we've been talking about this for 20, 30 years in Buffalo. But that it's an important part of this and a consideration, and still a part of our process. But I think what you think about what we're doing with the Kensington might depend on when you first read about it or when you first started talking about it. And we know that those biases and that history is there. So, but we are still obviously looking at how this impacts, and with all the projects we do at DOT, looking at how it impacts the communities that these roads are in. But
at the same time, I want to get you experience, but at the same time, I know you guys aren't politicians, you work for a state agency, but it's not unfair to say that the governor made this, as EJ has just referenced, a restorative justice style or approach to this, that this is going to revitalize this neighborhood. I'm not putting that on you, but I'm just saying, is the process different now, the way the DOT needs to approach it?
Well, I would say, obviously, when we first started talking about the last iteration of the project, that was the Biden administration's Reconnecting Communities. But reconnecting communities is a really broad thing too, and sometimes people think it's physically connecting. There's a lot of different ways that can be done. The new administration, the focus is not on reconnecting communities, but New York State, and this project, obviously, that's something that it's still an important thing for us. But what reconnecting communities means to me and what it means to the next person might be different. That's why we have these conversations. So.
Yeah, Ryan actually set me up for what I was going to say. I think that to his point, right? There's a nuance to the idea of reconnecting communities, right? And I would encourage any person to step away from taking that language in such a literal sense, right? And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of factors when you think about restorative justice, when you think about restoring the community. And then I also would like to challenge folks to think about restorative justice as more than just it being like solving racial tension, right? Or just solving one sort of like ethnic issue. I think that we need to expand the way that we think about restorative justice to income inequality, right? Accessibility. There's a number of things that contribute to quality of life across the state. And that's one thing that I've learned, I want to say, like going from Lewiston to Chautauqua, if you go out into more rural areas, the level of like poverty, the level of disconnection that you see in an area with one road that goes back and forth between like the most important parts of their neighborhood, it's the same kind of disconnection, right? And so I think that across the board, the mindset that we have with any project is really improving the quality of life in a neighborhood. I love that it's a neighborhood that I grew up in. And I think that for me, I look at what the potential of the project, right, past just the transportation aspect of it. Because now we're talking about safer streets. We're talking about like green spaces. We're talking about how do we get people from point A to point B. Our emergency service is going to be cut off. Grocery stores. We're talking about conversations that have been historically neglected for decades, right? So I think for us, Queen City Forward as an initiative is very, again, ambitious in the sense that we're thinking about what does this project look like once everyone else realize how beneficial improved transportation is, no matter what the improvement is, right? Because the idea is that whatever we do is going to make it better. I think, but we can't lose sight of what we want to do or what we intend to do in terms of improving that neighborhood. So I want to just jump to Syracuse for a second, because this is, for us, one of the shining examples of what outreach within our department looks like when it's done well. And I think that what we saw once that project grew legs was we saw jobs within the community. You know, we're seeing folks that, so they have a local hire program, specifically their program. You have to live within specific zip codes for their project. But these are people that live in a neighborhood that can go to work every morning knowing that they're improving their neighborhood. And they're also being paid $25 to $30 an hour, you know, sometimes even incentivizing the contractors to hire people that may have like felony records, right? So it's this idea of restorative justice in a way where you're giving people opportunities that may not have had those opportunities before. Now, there's obviously much more detail to all of those pieces, but I think taking into consideration how that project grew those legs, we're here now saying, well, what do we need to think about once we figure out what the project is, right? How are we making sure that the only benefit that this community gets isn't just an improved roadway, right? How do we make sure that we're also considering things that we might not have time to consider in the same way in a few years? And what I mean by that is when you think about your standard maintenance on the highway, there's nowhere near the level of intention behind when you're talking about asking the community to help craft a transformation to it, right? So there's a difference between like cleaning it up, repairing, doing necessary upgrades. That's things that we're going to do no matter what. But when you think about the intentionality of saying, hey, when this was constructed, we didn't think about how debris can blow over into it in the way that we might now. We didn't think about what was used so that the groundwater could, you know, be better. Like all of those different factors that in 2026 we would consider. I think it's important as a community to not get lost in what that project is specific to, like it being a tunnel or being filled in or being, you know, this one specific thing that moves transportation above it, or a deck or a capping project. Or there's been a million different iterations of this kind of project around the country that I think everyone has seen and people reference on a regular basis. Why can't we do this version, or why can't we do that version? Yeah. Well, again, if we jump back to Syracuse, we look at their original project. It's not the same project that they walked in with, but it took community input for them to say, this is the best way to solve this portion of the issue. Now, this is the best way to solve this portion of the issue. And they're having these specific special interest conversations with different communities and the business leaders. You know, how do we not lose business over by our business districts? How do we make sure that commuters can get to grocery stores? Like, those are conversations that, unfortunately, we didn't talk about 20, 30, well, maybe 20 years ago, but 50 years ago, we weren't thinking about the idea of not having access to grocery stores, because there were more mom and pops, right? And we can talk about why that is what it is. Yeah. But having grown up in that neighborhood, I mean, so I grew up on Bailey and Delavan, right? I was on Langmeyer, like literally over where Double Apple is. Double Apple was a vacant lot, a vacant building when I moved over there. I think it used to be Super Duper. So, which I wasn't alive for, but my aunt.
I was just going to say you're younger than you look.
My aunt's like, oh, yeah, I used to work at the Super Duper right there at the end of your. So, like, I know that, but it wasn't when I grew up. The closest grocery store was Save-A-Lot on Genesee and Schiller Park. And my mom didn't drive until I was of a certain age, so we were walking to the grocery store. So thinking about those things, and we had a car, right? But when my stepdad was at work, we walked to the grocery store. So when I say that to say, like, looking now to see a Double Apple, see Imperial have grown into a bigger store, to see Price Choppers, to see that within the communities, people have come in and said, we need these vital resources, and put that energy into creating those vital resources. The ideal and the hope is that with this project, when we talk about restorative justice, we can be a conduit for those conversations, right? We're not going to improve everything. We don't build hospitals. right? We don't build houses, we don't repair roofs, but we can get those people to the table if those conversations become an important part of this project. And that's where we want to push the community to say, if there's issues in your community, we're not the city of Buffalo. Unfortunately, we can't always go in and improve a Buffalo City street.
Right.
Unless we have to reconstruct the city street for a project, then we go in, we make improve. So when you're talking about the way that it was prefaced, it was more about the idea of creating the synergy within that community to say, oh, in addition to, you also need this, right? What's good? What good is a roadway if there's no stores along the roadway? What good is a roadway if there's? So it's those conversations I think that are super important. And if we look at, like 514, the biggest thing I think that shook the city, especially in like the CBO nonprofit sector, it was this idea that a community could have such a lack of resources. Well, if you lived in that community, you already knew that.
Exactly.
So the product after that specific event in history was people saying, oh my God, well, we had no idea. And a bunch of people being like, oh, really? Well, we did. Yeah. And so it's taking those lessons as a larger entity and saying, let's ask the community what they think. And I think that people are so conditioned to thinking or even being sold the idea that one thing is going to fix everything. And I'd say that, I turned 32 in 2 days. I'd say the biggest thing that I've learned in my 30s and throughout my 20s is that there's no one fix for everything. And I think oftentimes, especially as younger people, we're sold this idea, well, if we just fix this, then everything will be fine. And you're like, what about the 3 other chain reactions that happen after that? So it's not to say that one improvement can't make a significant difference, but it's also to say that we're never going to be at a place where there's not going to be an issue that we can solve. So we should always be proactive when we think about large, major projects like this. I mean, you hear, billions of dollars for a highway project. You should never think that that's all going to materials, right? It's not all going to, there's so many other pieces. You have so many subcontracts. You have a lot of different factors that come into play. But are we having those conversations as a community? There's a lot of small construction companies that do they know about these kind of opportunities that come about? When you talk restorative justice, it's about more than just what the product is at the end of the day. It's about having a real system that can feed into each other. But it's also about not thinking that one person is going to fix everything, because that's just not realistic.
Yeah, that is a really great point. And to that, I think it's also a great place for us to take a break. When we come back, we will continue this conversation on Queen City Forward right here on What's Next, Buffalo Toronto Public Media and NPR.
What is BTPM Plus? It's an evolution of Buffalo Toronto Public Media that brings you the best of PBS, where you can watch your favorite programs live and dig into collections curated just for you. And here's the best part. When you stream BTPM Plus, you're not just watching, you're supporting your local public media station, the journalism, the arts, and the storytelling that keeps our community connected. Visit btpm.org/plus today. Stream smarter, stream local.
A downed tree, a broken bike or 2, and hundreds of miles between Buffalo and Brooklyn. That's the journey in Rolling Through, a new video series from Buffalo Toronto Public Media. Producer Pat Kelly is biking the Empire State Trail, exploring nature, culture, and how eco-friendly travel can connect us to the places we visit.
Oh, we are getting rain soon.
Cool,
we can wrap
it's coming. New episodes of Rolling Through arrive every week. Watch on the BTPM YouTube channel and BTPM Plus.
Buffalo Toronto Public Media The Bridge. Made by music lovers and powered by listener support. Locally owned and operated. Always independent. This is public media.
From the fringes of the mainstream to the local music you love. Listen to Buffalo Toronto Public Media The Bridge Monday through Thursday, 8 p.m. to midnight on BTPM NPR at 88.7 or from your smart speaker.
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues facing the communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the BTPM app, and we'll work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern we should be addressing? Email us at whatsnext@btpm.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that matter. This is Buffalo Toronto Public Media, NPR.
And welcome back to What's Next. I'm Jay Moran along with Ejaz Jasilvis. Morning on What's Next on Buffalo Toronto Public Media. We are talking about Queen City Forward. This is a focus on the remaking of the Kensington Expressway with us Taje Jenkins-Jones and also Brian Whalen from the State Department of Transportation, Region 5. Interesting how you mentioned, you were talking about Syracuse. And I'm curious, because you brought up that great word, synergy, that community conversations help to build a newer vision for those projects in Syracuse. And if you've ever driven through Syracuse, you know they need a lot, that's for sure. But that being stated, what about the conversations that we've seen so far? We've had 6 listening sessions. I don't necessarily want you to characterize them or limit them, but at the same time, do you feel like they're, like I think it was Ryan said, close your eyes and just imagine what this could be like. Are we getting those types of inputs?
I mean, yes.
Okay.
Right? I think what's interesting is I think the people that come with that kind of input think they're doing extra credit when it's the assignment. So I think that's the bigger piece, right? It's kind of like you copy your friend's homework, but it's the homework from last week. Like that's what we're getting a lot of times, I think, where people feel limited. And it's not to say there's anything wrong with the idea of filling it in, but I don't know that if me and Ryan both had the idea of filling in the Humboldt Parkway, we'd probably have a different version of what that will look like or what it would need, right, going down. So I think that even with the idea of saying, hey, we have a mutual agreeing area, like, okay, now what does it look like after that, right? Is it just green space? Is it commercial space? Is it, you know what I mean? Is it like it's really more about saying like, you're not limited. And I know that we don't particularly have a system that gives you that option very often. So a lot of times it does feel like these are your options, and we want you to think maybe you gotta. No, you genuinely have, and I don't want to say blank check because it's not a blank check, right? But you absolutely have the scrap paper, right? You got the blank canvas. Yeah. You got the blank canvas to draw and be creative. And I think that I'm gonna do a shameless plug for my alma mater, but I went to Olmsted, and the idea around Olmsted is creative. Again, no pun intended. It's around creative thinking, right? Because Frederick Law Olmsted was a creative. But I think what people don't realize is that along with all that beautification and all of the work that was put into making it this beautiful emerald necklace, there was also a larger concept at hand that he worked with, right? His goal with these parkways was to connect, you know, the haves and the have-nots, right? Because these parks didn't exist until all the millionaires couldn't afford to keep them closed in anymore. So they had to find something to do with all of this green space. So when we really think about what the overall mission for this kind of stuff is, it should always be understanding how do we continue to create these social spaces where people can connect. You know what I mean? I think that there's just so many opportunities. I mean, so many options and ideas and opportunity for people to really idealize what this could look like. You know, it doesn't mean that we're going to do exactly, if somebody like drew a picture, we're not going to be like, oh yeah, this is it. We're taking it to the engineers, right? But you may be onto something that we don't know about. You know, when you think about folks that live in those very uniquely crafted out roadway areas, like say Trinidad Street, for example, they might have a very different perspective than someone who lives in the Fruit Belt or someone who lives on Humboldt Parkway about a way to improve it, because we may not have seen it from the perspective that they've seen it from. So I say that to say, like, we actually want the most unique ideas to come to the table more and more. Yes, if you feel like we should fill it in, tell us what that should look like at the end, right? Give us something more than just that idea. And I don't want to keep harping on that. I think that's just really the popular talking point right now.
Yeah.
But even if you like the tunnel or the deck or the capping, like there's a lot of different ways to go about transforming a highway. And I don't want people to think that they have to choose one specific thing, no matter what it is.
I think that we are getting good engagement from people who are very passionate about the project, and it's a great voice to have, and we've had good turnout. Our first meeting had 150 people. Our last meeting we had more than 60 people. Like, people are coming to these meetings and they're participating in the process. But it is a lot of people who have a passionate idea already. Me as the public information officer, you know, my goal is to try to get more voices involved and new voices involved. And that can be a struggle at times. And I think part of it is because this conversation has been going on so long, and people have fatigue, or people don't think something's going to happen, or they just want to wait because they don't know what this is right now. You know what I mean? And so I think, you talk about the commuters who have to be a part of this conversation, but we went out to Amherst and Cheektowaga, and I would have liked to see more of those commuters at those meetings. And people say, well, this is a City of Buffalo project. Why are you going out to Amherst and Cheektowaga early? And I said, because I've lived in Buffalo for a long time, and I've seen projects that get to the 8th or 9th inning, and then people seem to realize that the game is going on, and then they come out and talk about it. I'd like them to know it started right now,
right.
And have that conversation early. I think that there are people that live along the Kensington Expressway that aren't involved in this conversation yet because they either don't know what Queen City Forward is yet, or they don't think a project is going to happen, or they want to wait and see what we're going to put in, or they think a tunnel is still, that the tunnel is still the project. Those are hurdles that we have, but I'm just hoping that the sooner we can get as many people involved in the conversation, the more robust that conversation is going to be from the starting point, instead of doing what we always do in Buffalo, which is kind of putting up the hurdles once we're getting down to the nitty gritty. So, that's what we're trying to do. And that's why I'm really excited about this East High School one that's coming up on May 7th, because I think we have the opportunity, because the school has that infrastructure of being able to talk to parents and knows how to get people out to community meetings and help us get that out there, that we might get some new and different voices at this next meeting, and not to be taken lightly. Buffalo Public Schools is giving us some resources that we haven't had at other meetings. Mm-hmm. So they're going to help us have food at this meeting. And that sounds silly, right? But food brings people out to meetings.
Oh, that's not silly. Food.
And it's 5 to 7. It's dinner time, right?
Yeah.
So come out and have dinner and talk about the Kensington Expressway. We realize that people, this is after school and people have kids. Mm-hmm. At this meeting, we're hoping that we can have some teachers there that can help with some alternative programming while the parents go around. So I think that these are things that we have not been able to have at every meeting, but I'm excited and hoping that it'll have some opportunity to bring some new voices to the table.
So both of you have said you want new voices, new ideas, creative imagining. I'm wondering, do you think another hurdle you're facing here with the feedback you've been getting is some sort of groupthink, maybe, not to put it in a demeaning sort of term, but even within the community, there has been back and forth between people who want to see this project or who don't want to see this project. And so there have been a lot of preconceived notions and ideas. Do you think those are just being repetitively brought to these meetings? Is that part of the problem?
I don't think that's a problem.
Yeah.
I don't want to cast it as a problem. I think it's great to have engaged people with ideas. And I certainly don't want to make this sound like I'm trying to push anybody that's participating with us right now from continuing to do that.
But do you sense limits, though, in the thinking?
Yeah, not problems, limits more, yeah.
I think it's become sort of a split thing where people think it's one side, are you on our side or are you on the other side? And I'm saying, well, wait, what sides? How are there sides right now when we're still trying to figure out what the project is? We should all be working together, right? Even if you have different ideas, you should. This is the opportunity to come and have those conversations with each other at a meeting about what we're going to do. So, but I don't think that a conversation going one way or the other has to limit that. And I don't know how you feel about that, Taje, but I think the bigger hurdle that we're dealing with, honestly, because I hear it from people when I go to block club meetings and things like that, is people have said to me, why would I come to this meeting? We've been talking about this for 20 years and this is more of the same. I talked to somebody about this before. So I think that our biggest hurdle, especially with people that live in communities that have been having this conversation for a long time, for me, is fatigue. And I'm trying to get that energy back up and say, I know the history of this project, but I can tell you that we are putting time and energy into really trying to get a transformative project. So I need you to drink that Red Bull and get back out there with me and have the conversations, because just because something hasn't gotten done in the past doesn't mean it can't get done in the future.
Right. And I think that, it's that classic, a rumor gets around quick, whereas the truth takes some time to shuffle to folks. And I think that what we're seeing is people are a little bit late to the conversation. So the information they're receiving, right, they're probably doing a quick Google. And if you think that the information from the Kensington project is the same as the Queen City Forward project, you're already starting off on a false basis, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that what I would say it's groupthink in a sense, but I think that's just because people have similar opinions, right? I don't think it's necessarily that like folks they feel pigeonholed. I think that for me, we're in just a polarizing time, for one. I think that in terms of what information looks like and how people process it looks very different right now. And I say that to say, and not to go into any more tangents, but I think that there's this ideal of this or that, right? You have to kind of go with one specific thing, or else you're the opposition, right? As opposed to the idea of really introspectively looking at something and saying, like, do I really feel this way? Do I really think this? There's a lot of high level understanding of things, but somehow we miss the fundamentals a lot these days, right? So like we can come in and you can talk and use all the jargon and you can say all the things that you think will get you the extra credit and points on the test, but you don't fundamentally understand the actual process, right? So again, going back to the copy and the homework piece, and that's not necessarily to even affirm the idea of groupthink. It's more so about the idea of sometimes we go to the comments and we think we understand the article before we actually read the article. And so that's where we're getting caught. And we also have a society where when something makes you feel good, you go with it. So if someone affirms you in a way that makes you feel like what you're saying is the absolute truth and you can't be wrong, there's that emotional based argument that people affirm. You don't care what the facts are sometimes,
don't
right?
We know that as journalists.
Right. To that point, right? Yeah. So I say that to say that I think that people are just coming in like, because they're hearing, well, one, I think, and I'll say this as someone from the community, I think it's discouraging to hear people say, if you don't feel this way, then you are. And that's for either side, right? I think it's unfair to place 50 years of trauma onto anyone's back in the sense of saying, like, if you don't think that my way is the best way of resolving this, then you're wrong, right? I think that is where, for me, I think, okay, there might be a little bit. I don't even know if is it group thought. Is it the idea of the pressure of being being othered in that space? Maybe there's that. But I do think that people are thinking for themselves, and I think they're thinking about their experiences. But I also think that they're taking what they've seen already with the original project. They're taking what they're seeing from us. They're taking what they're hearing from any special interest group that's involved. General testimonies in the community, and they're taking these things and they're coming up with false premises, right? I think that people are coming to these conclusions that aren't genuinely the conclusion for the entire process, if that makes sense. It was a little mumbo jumbo what I was saying, but I hope you get what I mean, right? I think people are definitely being spoon-fed some things, but I don't think that everyone is necessarily on the side that they're on simply because someone gave them a good talking point.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And to your point, I do want to talk to you, Taje, a little bit more about your own personal experiences in this as not just representing the DOT, but a member of the community. And I was kind of having a similar conversation yesterday with our producer, actually, about me as a reporter and the myth of objectivity, that you can't have a personal investment in what you're working on. Otherwise, you can't be seen as unbiased. But it can sometimes make the work you do that much more impactful because you came from, where you're doing the work or where you're seeing it done. So I'm interested in learning about how you feel seeing this project unfold and being a part of it, knowing the impact that the 33 has had on the community all these years.
Oof. Okay. I think in regards to having personal experience, right, I think maybe I can sum it up in kind of this story, right? You think about the wading pools at MLK Park. My grandparents live 2 blocks from there now. Like I can stand at the edge of her street and almost see the park. So when I look at what that looked like when I was a kid, and over the last 30 years, it's worked, it hasn't worked, it's been gross, it's been great, it's been, you know what I mean? It turned into an ice skating rink at some point. So it's like, I look at that and I look at that slow process and how things were mitigated in regards to that from the community perspective, right? Because I was a kid at those times. Yeah. I think that is an allegory for the way that the pocket of the community, the East Side specifically, the experience that we've had as community members, right? We've kind of been the forgotten community. So I think right now it's interesting because folks that did not benefit from a lot of the other transformation that we saw around the city, right, are now feeling like this is the one opportunity that we get to be the focal point of Buffalo in terms of like being transformative. But I also think that the conversations, there's bigger conversations, right? Because right now, I don't think that the same community that lived there when I grew up there isn't the exact same community, right? They've been priced out, they've been pushed out, at some point you get to a point where you're like, I'm making a little bit more money. I have no resources nearby my house. I'm gonna move to a different part of town, or my parents moved to Depew, right? And they moved to Depew because it was a better option than where we were. They owned their house, right? It was not an issue of that sort. We still go into the community. My aunt still lives there. My grandma, a few other family members. So it's not even that it was a neighborhood issue, because my mom was always like, oh, I wouldn't move off the east side. And then at some point they were like, oh, she's a big shopping buff, if that's a thing. Whatever, shopaholic is probably the word for it. So and I mean like Walmart, Target. So when she moved into her neighborhood and she had 3 of them, in both directions, because she's over near Transit now.
Yeah, you certainly didn't have that on the east side.
Right. She's like, oh, I got everything I need. And but she now she goes to Double Apple and gets her meat. She still go to Steve's and stuff like that. So, and it's still like a matter of her utilizing the neighborhood that she's comfortable and loves. But they found a better situation somewhere else because that community wasn't provided. So now you look back now as someone who formerly lived there, and we go into the grocery stores. I see community outreach programs. I see all the stuff that as a kid I had to go to the west side for. I had to get on the bus, go down, take the 26 down Delavan or walk down Delavan. I go hang out at my friend's house that live on the west side of my house. In the summers, I stay over her house because there was just more community there at that time in terms of like, it wasn't that there weren't people, because there was tons of kids over in my neighborhood. You didn't have the arts programs like we do now. You didn't have these other small community programs and things that have created more community within the east side. So I think that for me, I can be objective in saying that I love this space. I don't live there, so I can't dictate what this should look like for people who live there. But I know what a prosperous quality of life looks like, because I've experienced it in a few different ways, right? I've met people have better qualities of life than me in different areas. And you can see when you travel, and I think this is the other big piece, a lot of people don't leave Buffalo. So these are not unique to here. If you travel to other cities that have made it on the other side of these kinds of projects and see what that looks like on the other side, you start to get a little bit more hope as to what it can be, but it takes you out of that box. And I guess my biggest thing is I can be objective in saying that no matter what happens, I'm going to always advocate for the best outcome for the community. But I don't think the community understands the level of power that they have in this process. And for me, that's my goal, start to finish across the board. And that's the state's goal. So, it aligns.
I think you make a really good point, though, about people move, right? Mm-hmm. And the neighborhoods change over years and decades. Yeah. And your mom moved to Depew, and I know you live in a different part of the city now. And that's why we have to be careful about getting into those conversations about things like waiting and voting and things like that, and which community's voice gets the biggest weight here, because it is such an expansive project that limiting it to this is the people that it affects most. Okay, I bet Taje's mom still has an opinion on this. She lives in Depew now, so we're going to think less of her voice now. So those are all the kind of things that we take into consideration without talking specifically about, okay, you have to live in this block of Humboldt Parkway for your voice to count this much. And that's not to say that there may not be some considerations to that further down the line, but that's why I always get concerned when people start asking, well, what's the formal weighting process of my vote on what this project is going to be? And it's such a bigger process when we're talking about an expansive project like that.
Yeah, that's true, considering the fact that a lot of people, honestly, who live in that area were not the original homeowners and families.
Sure. And people that lived in that area may live someplace else now. And you have to consider, okay, what if this project then causes impacts in those other neighborhoods, and now you've just moved the people who were affected 20 years ago and are, creating impacts in the places where they live now. So there's always a give and take with that. Obviously you want to do no harm, but you want to fix the harms of the past, but everything that you do has a impact someplace else, and that's why we have to be so thorough and intentional with the process, so that we can try to figure out what all those impacts are going to be ahead of time.
Yeah. And to even just add to that, it's one thing to love a neighborhood, to be from a neighborhood, to even have family still in a neighborhood and want to represent those folks. But it's a different thing to have to endure the actual process, right? So to Ryan's point, it's not weighted. But when we talk about like construction impacts, I don't know that Amherst resident will have the same, that we would want. Not that isn't something that a person could contribute no matter where they live. But when you think about that specific impact, what that's going to look like for the next 5 years, you're going to care a little bit more about the people that live directly in front of it. Yeah. You know what I mean? So that's to his point, right? I think we can't specifically give certain things weights, but I think that there's always going to be a level of nuance to how we consider any factors in the projects, especially when you talk about an EIS, because it does require alternatives. Those alternatives are studied in a way that's extremely thorough, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't just talk about, okay, well, is this better versus that? It's going to talk about all the good, all the bad, and everything in between, because we need to make the most educated decision.
Yeah.
We are winding down on our time here, but I want to make sure that we mention this upcoming listening session. Yep. I mean, you mentioned it a little bit in passing. Let's get into the specifics, and also maybe just encourage not people just to come, but what mentally, I guess, they should come with.
Yeah, East Community High School, May 7th, 5 to 7 p.m. It's, as Taje said, kind of an open house style where you can walk around and engage with people from DOT. So you can come at 6:30. Mm-hmm. You can come at 5. You don't need to stay for the whole time.
Are you guys going to be there?
Yes. We will be there. Come and talk to me and Taje. Like we said, we're excited. There's going to be food there while supplies last. If you want to make sure you get some, get there early probably. Right. And there's just going to be more resources than we've been able to have at other meetings. So this could be the one that you put on your calendar as your chance to come and have a meal and be able to have your kids have some alternative programming and have that conversation with us. So I would, especially, and it's right next to the Kensington Expressway. We are in the East Side. There's public transit right down to East High School. Like, this is an opportunity to get out and talk to us. So I'm hoping we get some new voices there. Yeah. I know you've talked about it in the past. This is a new process. Come and talk about it with us now. And, that's my pitch.
Yeah. I mean, to add on to what Ryan's saying, it's exactly that. It's super accessible. We're right near MLK Park. There's a couple of bus routes nearby. I guess my big thing too, I want to thank, the restructuring that they've done. I'm a Buffalo Public Schools graduate. So the restructuring they've done with their community navigators and their Saturday academies and just like the whole new community approach that they have to supporting students, I think that that's something that we're hoping to continue to grow as a department, even, outside of just partnering with the listening sessions. So I want to thank them. I want to thank all of the folks too that we've worked with. But in terms of the listening sessions, come write your questions down. If your mind started going while we're doing this interview right now, get a piece of paper, get your notes write down questions. We will have experts there. So if you have questions for engineers, now again, there's no project specific right now. There's no specific project rather right now. Mm-hmm. So when you come, come with
hypothetical, would an engineer go? I mean,
in one-on-one conversations, they can go as hypothetical as you want to go, and they'll have more knowledge base than I do about specific things that we can or can't do and how the process works. So bring whatever you want.
No project specific. So I mean, if anybody's hoping to get that, there aren't any, but they can answer questions. Even if there's questions about what the former project looked like. If you're like, oh, I like this aspect, but I'm wondering, those are the conversations to put forward. And then I also want to say, come with environmental questions too. If people have questions, construction,
lots of topics,
all that stuff.
And I'd just like to plug, even if you can't make it to the meetings, and there's going to be more in the future, queencityforward.dot.ny.gov. All of our displays are there on PDFs that you can go through. There's a survey that you can take. You can fill in your comment forms. So a lot of that information's on our website and opportunities to provide your public comment, even if you can't get to the meetings.
Instagram, Facebook as well. Yeah, reach out if anyone listening is interested in potentially having a presentation done for a small group, or if you're interested in learning more, or even just getting some of the flyers sent over to you, please reach out to us. That's the most important piece, is the community push. And we're not going to stop until we get a robust amount of opinions. So
turn out, people.
We'll keep asking. We'll see at the festivals too.
All right. Sounds good. Well, I guess we have a couple more minutes until we wind down.
Nope.
Okay, well, we'll be wrapping things up.
That was Charles. Yeah, that's his look when it's time to go.
All right, well, with that, all right, well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much to Taje and Ryan for joining us today. And everyone, please do remember to mark your calendars for May 7th. That will be the next meeting for Queen City Forward. Be engaged and voice your opinions. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to What's Next. I'm Jay Moran for E.J. Cecile, Ryan Whalen, and also Taje Jenkins-Jones. Thanks for joining us today on What's Next on Buffalo Toronto Public Media, NPR.
Support for the BTPM NPR What's Next podcast comes from Health Foundation for Western and Central New York, partnering with the community to pursue racial and socioeconomic health equity. Learn more at hfwcny.org.